The small town of Riverside Creek, North Carolina sits nestled between rolling hills and pine forests, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. Population 3,000, give or take. The main street has a diner, a hardware store, and a baseball field that has hosted Little League games for 40 years. Summer brings tourists looking for mountain air and small-town charm, but mostly, Riverside Creek belongs to the people who were born there and never left. Sarah Whitmore was not one of those people. She had moved to Riverside Creek 3 weeks ago, renting a small cottage on the edge of town. She kept to herself, going to work at the base outside the city limits, coming home in the evening when the light turned soft and golden through the trees. She didn't wave at neighbors. She didn't shop at the local grocery store on Saturdays when everybody gathered. She was, in the truest sense of the phrase, a quiet person living a quiet life. But quiet people attract attention in small towns. They become mysteries to solve. By the second week, the ladies at the hair salon had invented 3 different stories about who she was. By the third week, the men at the hardware store had settled on the theory that she was either an heiress hiding from scandal or a writer working on her first novel. Nobody asked her directly. That would have been rude, and Riverside Creek had manners, even if curiosity burned underneath. Sarah was 32 years old, with brown hair that she always wore in a simple ponytail, and eyes that seemed to see through things rather than at them. She had the kind of bearing that came from discipline and purpose. Her hands were strong, her posture perfect, and there was something in the way she moved that suggested she was always aware of her surroundings. These were not things most people in Riverside Creek would have noticed. They were trained observers, most of them. They just didn't know what they were looking at. On a Thursday evening in late June, Sarah decided to take a walk. The baseball field behind the elementary school was lit up for a summer league game. The Riverside Creek Legends, a team made up of men in their 30s and 40s who still remembered when baseball mattered most in their lives, were playing against a team from the neighboring town. Sarah watched from outside the fence, her hands in her pockets, her face calm and expressionless. The Legends were losing, badly. By the 7th inning, the score was 8-3. The crowd, which was mostly made up of wives and children and retirees with nothing else to do, had mostly stopped paying attention. But then something shifted. A new batter stepped up to the plate. His name was Tom Brennan, and he was the kind of man who had been popular in high school and never quite recovered from the fact that his glory days were behind him. He hit a solid double down the left field line. The crowd cheered a little politely. A few of the wives clapped. Tom's friend Marcus, who was running bases, suddenly thought he saw an opportunity. One of the outfielders had made a weak throw. Marcus decided to go for third base. As he slid into the base, kicking up a cloud of dust, he saw Sarah standing outside the fence. She was wearing jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. Her face was blank, uninterested. Something about her made Marcus angry, or not angry exactly. Annoyed, superior. "Hey, quiet girl," he called out, jogging over to where she stood. She didn't look at him. "You want to play?" Sarah turned to him slowly. She had gray eyes, the color of winter water. "I said, do you want to play?" Marcus repeated, grinning at her. "We need someone to fill in. Our backup just pulled a hamstring. You look athletic enough, I guess. You know how to play baseball, or is that too complicated for someone like you?" There was no reason for him to say it that way. There was nothing in Sarah's appearance that suggested she wouldn't know how to play baseball. But there was something in the way she stood, something in her silence and her stillness, that made men like Marcus feel small. So he knocked her down to make himself taller. Sarah looked at Marcus for a long moment, then she looked away. "I'm not interested," she said quietly. "Come on," Marcus called after her as she started to walk away. "Don't be scared, it's just baseball." Sarah kept walking. She didn't hear what Marcus said next because she had already turned the corner, but the other men heard it. They heard him say, "Probably never played a sport in her life." They heard his friends laugh. They heard Tom Brennan say, "Some women just aren't built for anything physical. It's not an insult, just biology." And none of them noticed that Sarah's hands, which were still in her pockets, had clenched into fists. That night, Sarah sat in her cottage and made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the darkness and thought about where she had been a year ago. She thought about the desert, about the heat, about the weight of equipment and responsibility. She thought about the 16 men she had served with and the 5 of them who didn't come home. She thought about the reasons she had left that life and the reasons she had come to a quiet town where nobody knew her name. She had come to Riverside Creek to disappear, to be normal, to be invisible. She had thought that would be a good thing. But invisibility, she was starting to understand, came with a price. Invisible people could be dismissed. Invisible people could be mocked. Invisible people could have their character questioned by strangers who knew nothing about them. Sarah looked at her coffee and wondered how long she could keep pretending that being invisible was enough. The next morning, she got up at 5:30, as she did every morning. She did 100 push-ups. She ran 5 miles. She trained with her weapons in the basement, muscle memory movements that her body remembered even when her mind wanted to forget. By 8 o'clock, she was clean and dressed and ready to go to work. She didn't know that at that exact same moment, Marcus and Tom and 4 other men from the baseball team were having breakfast at Henderson's diner. She didn't know that they were talking about her. She didn't know that Marcus was laying out a plan for the Saturday evening game, a plan that involved the quiet newcomer and an opportunity to teach her a lesson about staying in her place. She didn't know, but she would find out soon enough. And when she did, everything in Riverside Creek was going to change. Saturday came hot and humid, the kind of day where you could feel the sky pressing down on you, where the air felt thick enough to swim through. By evening, when the game started, the heat hadn't broken. Families sat in the bleachers with cold drinks and fans, watching as the Riverside Creek Legends took the field against a team from 30 miles away. Sarah had spent the day in her cottage. She had read a book. She had done laundry. She had made dinner and eaten it alone. She had told herself 100 times that she should not go to the baseball game. She had no reason to go. She had no interest in baseball. She had no interest in social events or community gatherings or anything that required her to be around people and remember how to be normal. But at 6 o'clock, as the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, Sarah found herself putting on fresh clothes and driving to the field. She parked her car at the edge of the lot and walked to the fence. The game was already in progress. The Legends were doing better this week, winning 4-2. The crowd was bigger, louder. It was Saturday evening, and this was what people in Riverside Creek did on Saturday evenings. They came to watch their neighbors play baseball and pretend for a few hours that they were 18 again and the future was unlimited. Sarah recognized Marcus sitting on the bench. He saw her immediately. His face did something complicated, surprise, and then a smile that wasn't quite a smile. He said something to Tom, who also looked over at Sarah. Both men grinned. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, even in the heat. The chill was recognition. She had seen men make that expression before, though not on baseball fields in small towns. She had seen it in places where men made decisions about what they could get away with. It was the expression of someone who had just decided something. In the 4th inning, a batter for the Legends hit a ball that went wide and rolled past the baseline toward the fence where Sarah was standing. Marcus, who was on base, suddenly broke for third. The play was obvious enough. He was trying to distract the fielders, trying to make them rush. And as Sarah picked up the ball to hand it back, Marcus diverted. He ran toward her instead of toward home. "Tag me," he said, running directly at her with a grin on his face. "Come on, tag me. You know how to do that, don't you?" Sarah stepped back. Marcus didn't. He grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the fence, into the area where the ball was in play. She was suddenly on the field, and Marcus had his hand on her arm, and he was laughing. "He can't count the run if you're not clear," Tom called from the bench, laughing too. "She's interfering." The umpire, a tired-looking man in his 60s named Charlie, hesitated. He didn't know what to do. Sarah tried to pull her arm away. Marcus held on. "Come on, quiet girl," Marcus said, his voice low and mean. "You should have played when I asked. Now you don't have a choice." It happened in a second. 1 second, Marcus had Sarah's arm. The next second, his arm was twisted behind his back and he was on his knees. Sarah had barely moved. Her face was completely calm. She had simply turned and twisted, using his own momentum against him. It was a move she had practiced 10,000 times. It was instinct. Marcus gasped. The pain was immediate and intense. "Let him go," Tom called out, but he didn't leave the bench. None of the men left the bench. Sarah held Marcus for just a moment longer. Then she released him. He stumbled forward, gasping, holding his arm to his chest. The crowd had gone silent. Everyone was staring. Sarah walked back to the fence. She adjusted her shirt. She waited for someone to say something, to make accusations, to demand an explanation. The game continued, but something had changed. Marcus sat out for the rest of the evening. Tom didn't look at Sarah again. When the game ended with the Legends winning, nobody came over to talk to her. Nobody asked if she was okay. Nobody asked what had happened. Sarah drove home and sat in her cottage and waited for the phone to ring or for there to be a knock on the door. Neither came. She went to bed at 10 o'clock and slept the sleep of someone who had been expecting trouble and found it and handled it and was now waiting to see what the cost would be. The cost came on Monday. Charlie the umpire had talked, not with malice but with confusion. He had told his friend at the hardware store that he had seen the quiet newcomer do something unusual to Marcus Brennan. Word had spread. By Monday morning, everyone in Riverside Creek knew that Sarah had done something to Marcus, though nobody seemed to know exactly what. More importantly, the story had changed in the telling. By Monday evening, the story was that Sarah had attacked Marcus unprovoked. By Tuesday morning, Marcus was saying that his arm hurt, that maybe something was torn, that he might need to go to the doctor. By Tuesday afternoon, Tom was suggesting that the quiet newcomer had a temper, that you could never know what kind of person someone really was, that just because she was quiet didn't mean she wasn't dangerous. By Wednesday, Sarah got a call from her work. They wanted to talk to her about an incident at a local business. They had received complaints about her conduct, nothing specific, just complaints. Sarah sat in the office of her supervisor, a woman named Jennifer who had been kind enough when Sarah started 3 weeks ago, and listened while Jennifer tried to explain what she couldn't explain. "We have to take these things seriously," Jennifer said, not meeting her eyes. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, but for now, we're going to need you to take a leave of absence while we look into it." Sarah didn't argue, she didn't try to explain, she simply nodded and left the office. As she drove home, she understood what was happening. Marcus had framed the situation and the town had believed him. They wanted to believe him. It was easier than admitting that a quiet newcomer who kept to herself might have hurt one of their own. It was easier to imagine that she was the problem. She had come to Riverside Creek to disappear. But disappearing meant accepting that her voice didn't matter. Disappearing meant accepting that people would decide what was true about her without ever asking. By Thursday, Sarah had made a decision. She wasn't going to disappear anymore. She was going to find out exactly what Marcus and Tom had been planning, and she was going to expose it. And when the people of Riverside Creek knew the truth, she was going to make them understand that you don't get to dismiss the quiet ones. Sarah had spent 12 years in the Navy. 8 of those years had been spent in a specialized unit where investigation and intelligence gathering were as important as physical training. She knew how to find information. She knew how to talk to people. And most importantly, she knew how to see patterns that other people missed. On Friday morning, she went to Henderson's diner. The diner was busy, as it always was on Friday mornings. The counter was full of people ordering coffee and breakfast. The booths were occupied by regulars who came every week at the same time. Sarah sat at the counter and ordered eggs and toast. She didn't look at anyone, she just listened. After about 10 minutes, Marcus and Tom came in. They went to a booth in the back, the kind of booth where you could talk without being overheard if you kept your voice down. Sarah kept her head down and listened. She had trained for this. Hearing what people didn't want you to hear was a skill like any other. "I can't believe she's still here," Marcus was saying. "I thought she'd be gone by now." "Give it time," Tom replied. "My cousin works at the county office. He saw her file. She used to work at the base, but they put her on leave. That's going to follow her. Even if she moves, people will know." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "What if she denies it?" Marcus asked. "Who's going to believe her?" Tom said. "She's nobody. She showed up 3 weeks ago and hurt you without any reason. Why would we lie about that?" Sarah finished her eggs and left money on the counter. She didn't look at Marcus or Tom. She simply left. That afternoon, she made a phone call. Her sister, Emma, worked in law enforcement in Virginia. Emma answered on the second ring. "Sarah, is everything okay?" Sarah explained the situation calmly and completely. She told Emma what had happened at the baseball game. She told her what Marcus and Tom had said. She told her that her job had put her on leave based on unsubstantiated complaints. She told her that she was being quietly pushed out of town based on a lie. Emma listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Emma said one word: proof. "There are security cameras at the ball field," Sarah said, "and probably at the businesses around it. If we can get footage from Saturday evening, you can see exactly what happened. You can see that Marcus grabbed me first. You can see that I defended myself appropriately." "I'll need your permission to request that footage," Emma said. "And you might need a lawyer. This might get complicated." "I know," Sarah said. "Why are you doing this?" Emma asked. "You could just leave. You could move somewhere else." Sarah looked out her cottage window at the green mountains and the blue sky. She thought about disappearing. She thought about how invisibility felt like safety until it became a kind of death. Because, Sarah said, I'm tired of people deciding who I am without asking. Emma got the footage on Monday. The county had kept security recordings from the business district, and the ball field had a camera that was part of the recreational area system. When Emma sent Sarah the files, Sarah watched them on her laptop. The footage was clear. It showed Marcus running toward her. It showed him grabbing her arm. It showed her defending herself. It showed her releasing him immediately after. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for interpretation. What was remarkable was what happened after. After Sarah walked back to the fence, Tom stood up and said something to the other men. They laughed. They high-fived. They had been planning something, and they thought it had worked. They thought they had trapped her. Sarah sent the footage to Jennifer, her supervisor. She sent it to Charlie, the umpire. She sent it to the police department in Riverside Creek. She sent it to Marcus and Tom with a simple message. This is the truth. I'll see you in court. Then she waited. It took 3 days for the situation to reverse itself. 3 days for the evidence to speak louder than the narrative that had been built. 3 days for people to understand that they had been wrong. Jennifer called Sarah on Wednesday evening. I'm so sorry, she said immediately. You can come back to work. We're clearing this completely from your file. I'm sorry for putting you on leave. The police called Sarah on Thursday. They said they wanted to interview Marcus and Tom. They said they had reviewed the security footage and that it appeared Marcus Brennan had initiated physical contact with Sarah. They asked if Sarah wanted to press charges. Sarah said she would think about it. But the real moment came on Thursday evening when there was a knock on her cottage door. Sarah opened it to find Charlie, the umpire, standing outside. His weathered face looked uncomfortable. He was holding something in his hand. I owe you an apology, Charlie said. I was part of passing along that story. I didn't know what I was really doing, but I was part of it. I wanted to tell you that you didn't do anything wrong and that I'm sorry. Sarah looked at Charlie for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and invited him in. They sat in her living room, and Charlie told her about the baseball community, about how tight it was, how defensive they could be, about how the story had made sense to him at the time, but how the footage had changed everything. Why did they do it? Sarah asked. Why did they decide to frame me? Charlie was quiet for a moment. Because, he said finally, you scared them. Your strength scared them. In a small town, people know their place. You don't know yours yet, and that made them uncomfortable. After Charlie left, Sarah sat alone in her cottage and thought about what he had said. She thought about the way small towns worked, and the way people protected their boundaries, and the way silence could be interpreted as weakness. But she also thought about the fact that the truth had won. Not immediately, not easily, but ultimately, the truth had won. By the following Monday, the entire town knew what had happened. The security footage had been shared at Henderson's diner, at the hardware store, at the church. Everyone had seen it. Everyone understood that Marcus had initiated the physical contact and that Sarah had been defending herself. More than that, everyone understood that Marcus and Tom had deliberately tried to frame her. What nobody expected was what happened next. Marcus Brennan showed up at Sarah's cottage on Monday evening just as the sun was setting. He was alone. He looked smaller than Sarah remembered, less sure of himself. He knocked on the door and waited, not making eye contact when she opened it. I want to talk to you, Marcus said. I want to explain why I did it. Sarah considered closing the door. She had every right to close the door. Instead, she stepped aside and let him in. They sat in the same living room where Charlie had sat just days before. Marcus looked around nervously, as if he expected the space to judge him. I don't have a good excuse, Marcus began. Tom said I was making excuses when I tried to explain, and he's right. I don't have a good excuse for what I did. Sarah waited. You came to town and you didn't try to be friends with anyone. You didn't smile. You didn't join the community. You just lived here like you were better than us, like you didn't need us, Marcus said, and his voice was bitter. I'm 42 years old, I work at the lumber mill, I have a wife and 2 kids, and I'm the best baseball player this town has. That's my thing, that's how I matter here. And then you came along and you didn't even respect that. You didn't even care about the baseball. What? So you tried to hurt me, Sarah said quietly. So I tried to prove that I was still worth something, Marcus said. That my opinion still mattered, and I did it by making you look bad because that was easier than figuring out why I even cared what you thought. Sarah stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the mountains, at the fading light. "I came here to disappear," she said. "I came here because I was tired of mattering. I was tired of being strong. I was tired of my strength being the only thing about me that people cared about." She turned back to look at Marcus. "So I chose to be invisible. I chose to be nothing to anyone. But invisibility isn't freedom. Invisibility is just another kind of prison." Marcus didn't say anything, he just listened. "You hurt me," Sarah continued. "Not because you wanted to know me, but because you wanted me to stop being invisible to you. You wanted me to react. You wanted me to matter, even if it meant mattering in a bad way. And I understand that. I understand wanting to matter." She sat back down across from Marcus. "But you did it in a way that was dishonest. You blamed me for something I didn't do. You told a story that wasn't true, and that's not okay. You don't get to make yourself feel important by making someone else look bad." Marcus cried. It wasn't dramatic. There were just tears that ran down his face and his shoulders shook a little. When he spoke, his voice was thick. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm really sorry." "I know," Sarah said. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now you go to the police and you tell them the truth," Sarah said. "All of it. You tell them that you planned to grab me, that you tried to frame me, that you and Tom made up the whole story." Marcus nodded. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy and had finally put it down. "I'll do it tomorrow," he said. After Marcus left, Sarah sat in her cottage as darkness fell outside. She thought about forgiveness. She thought about the fact that Marcus was a man who had been lost in his own small life, just as she had been lost. She thought about the possibility that maybe invisibility and dominance were both ways of running away. The next morning, Marcus went to the police station. He gave a full confession. Tom, when he found out, gave his own confession. The police called Sarah and told her that both men were willing to issue public apologies. Both men wanted to know if they could do anything to make amends. A week passed. Sarah returned to work. Jennifer, her supervisor, made a formal apology. Sarah was invited to speak at a town council meeting. She was invited to join the community Facebook group. She was invited to Henderson's Diner for coffee. People who had believed the story against her a week before now treated her with a new kind of respect. Not friendship exactly, but respect. On Saturday evening, she was invited back to the baseball game. She almost didn't go, but something made her decide to go anyway. She parked her car at the edge of the lot and walked to the fence, just as she had done that first evening when she hadn't wanted to. The field was full. It seemed like the whole town had shown up. The Legends were playing, but there was something different. Charlie, the umpire, looked over and nodded at Sarah. She nodded back. In the middle of the fourth inning, there was an announcement. The public address system crackled to life, and the game paused. A woman's voice, warm and steady, came through the speakers. "I'd like to say something," the voice said. It was Margaret Chen, the director of the recreation center. "A week ago, this community made a serious mistake. We heard a story and we believed it without asking questions. We judged someone without knowing them. And when the truth came out, we had to face the fact that we had done something wrong." The crowd was silent. "But something else happened," Margaret continued. "Someone in our community chose not to just go away quietly. She chose to tell the truth. She chose to hold us accountable for what we had done. And because she did that, we have an opportunity to be better." Margaret paused. "Sarah Whitmore came to Riverside Creek 3 weeks ago and asked nothing of anyone. She just wanted to live her life in peace. But this community didn't give her that peace. And now I want to ask her to do something she didn't come here to do. I want to ask her to join us." Sarah felt people turning to look at her from the bleachers. "I want to invite Sarah to be a volunteer coach for our youth baseball league," Margaret said. "And I want to ask her to share her story with our children. Not because I know all of her story, but because I know that she is someone who is strong and honest and brave enough to stand up for what's right. Those are the things we want our children to learn." There was applause. It started in the bleachers and spread through the crowd. People were standing. They were clapping. Sarah didn't move. She just stood at the fence with her hands in her pockets and watched. When the applause died down, something unexpected happened. Marcus walked out onto the field. He was still in his baseball uniform, his arm in good working order, his face serious. He walked over to home plate and took the microphone from Margaret. "I've got something to say," Marcus said, and his voice was clear and steady. "Last week, I did something bad. I blamed someone for something they didn't do. I told a lie, and I did it because I was angry and small. But then I did something that was harder. I told the truth, and I learned something. I learned that this town is better when we're honest with each other. I learned that strength in a person doesn't make us weaker. It makes us stronger. And I learned that you can't judge someone by whether they fit into the space you decided they should fit into. Sarah, he said, I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry for what I did, and I hope you'll stay in Riverside Creek. I think we need people like you. He put the microphone down and walked back to the bench. The crowd clapped again, but it was quieter this time, more genuine. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked around the fence and onto the field. She walked to where Margaret was standing, and she took the microphone. I came here to disappear, Sarah said. Her voice was calm, but everyone could hear it. The field had gone completely silent. I came here because I thought being invisible would be easier than being seen, but I was wrong. Invisibility isn't freedom, it's just another way of being trapped. She looked out at the crowd. She saw families sitting together in the bleachers. She saw old men who had probably played this game for 60 years. She saw children who might grow up to play baseball or might do something else entirely. I'm not going to tell you my whole story, Sarah continued, because some of that story belongs to the people I served with and they don't get to be part of my redemption. But I can tell you this. I know what it means to have strength that people don't understand. I know what it means to be underestimated. And I know what it means to stand up for what's right, even when it would be easier not to. But what I learned this week is something new. I learned that strength and vulnerability can live in the same person. And I learned that a real community is a place where people can be honest about their mistakes and still be welcome. She looked at Marcus. I'm going to accept Margaret's offer, Sarah said. I'm going to coach your children. I'm going to teach them that strength isn't something to be afraid of in themselves or in other people. And I'm going to tell them that silence isn't the answer. Speaking up is the answer. She handed the microphone back to Margaret. As she walked off the field, people stood and clapped. This time, it wasn't the polite clap of a small town trying to do the right thing. It was the genuine clap of people who understood that they had been given a second chance, and they had taken it. That night, Sarah stood in her cottage and looked out at Riverside Creek. She thought about the life she had tried to build as an invisible person. She thought about the cost of hiding, and she thought about the possibility of becoming part of something, not by disappearing into it, but by standing strong within it. The next morning, she woke up early, she did her push-ups, she ran her 5 miles, she did her training. But this time, when she came home, she didn't go straight inside, she walked to Henderson's diner. Charlie was there at the counter, so were Tom and Marcus. When Sarah walked in, they made room for her. She sat down and ordered coffee. Nobody made a big deal about it. They just talked about the baseball game and the weather and the fact that the summer was going to be hot this year. And Sarah, for the first time since she had come to Riverside Creek, felt like she wasn't disappearing anymore. She felt like she was becoming part of something. Not because she had been forced into it, but because she had chosen to be honest. And because her community, imperfect as it was, had chosen to be honest with her too. The investigation into what had happened at the baseball field went through the proper channels. Marcus and Tom each faced misdemeanor charges for filing a false report. They served community service. They paid fines. They stood in front of the town and admitted what they had done. And then, slowly, they began to rebuild their lives with the truth as the foundation. Sarah started coaching baseball to the youth team. She taught the children about discipline and focus. But more importantly, she taught them to question what they were told and to have courage in speaking truth. She taught them that strength wasn't something to be ashamed of, whether you were a boy or a girl. By the end of the summer, the youth team made it to the county playoffs. They didn't win, but they played with integrity and heart, and when they lost well. They shook hands with the other team. They thanked their coach. They talked about what they would do better next year. Sarah stood on the sideline and watched them, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt at home. Not because Riverside Creek was easy, but because it had been hard and she had faced that hardness, and the town had faced its own hardness, and together they had become something better. In the autumn, when the weather turned cool and the mountains began to show their colors, Sarah received a call. It was from the base where she had worked before her leave of absence. They wanted to know if she would consider coming back, not to desk work but to active work. They wanted her for a project. They said they knew her value now, and they wanted it directed toward training the next generation of special operations soldiers. Sarah told them she would think about it. She thought about it for a week. She thought about the life she had been trying to build in Riverside Creek. She thought about the softball team she had started coaching. She thought about Charlie and Marcus and Tom and the slow work of building a real community instead of an invisible existence. But she also said something else. She told the base that she wanted the training program to be open to women. She wanted the next generation of soldiers to know, from the very beginning, that strength had no gender. She wanted them to see that quiet didn't mean weak. She wanted them to understand that sometimes the most powerful people in a room are the ones who are not heard until they choose to speak. When they asked her why this mattered so much to her, Sarah told them the truth. She told them about Riverside Creek and Marcus and Tom. She told them about learning that invisibility wasn't the same as strength, and that being seen was worth the vulnerability it required. She told them that she had come to a small town wanting to disappear, but what she had discovered was that what she really needed was to belong. And belonging meant being honest. It meant being seen. It meant standing up and being counted, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Riverside Creek gave her a going-away party when she left. The entire town came. Henderson's diner closed for the evening, and they had the party there. People told her thank you. People told her she had changed something in their town. People told her they would never forget what she had taught them about the cost of assumptions and the power of truth. But the thing that Sarah remembered most was what Charlie said as he was leaving. He put his hand on her arm and he said, "You came here wanting to be invisible. You leave here having changed all of us. I don't think you'll be invisible anywhere ever again." Sarah didn't know if that was true, but she hoped it was, because being visible, she had learned, was the only honest way to live.